Okay, hello everybody. This is Jeff Thompson with Aventi. We're here again to talk a little bit about customer success. I'm here with my Aventi partner, Michaela Gubbels, and we're going to talk about some of the newest ideas or latest thinking, best practices around customer success. Just to start, for our purposes, customer success in this setting really is referring to references or customer content or promoting one of your customer success from a project or something that they've done with you. Just so stepping back, just to recognize that I think customer success is a term, I'd say it's a fairly new term, sort of been coming up a lot in the last several years. It has very broad and sort of an expanding or changing definition. I've noticed it depends on what company is talking, what agency, what individuals, or what their perspective is in terms of how customer success is defined. From Aventi's standpoint, I'd say we broadly consider customer success to include anything a company does to help its customers be successful, and anything that we do or a company does to promote that success. So that's sort of the typical customer references area. I think broadly customer success can include, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but things like training, rollout and communications, internal communications, especially if you are trying to get the company to use a new application, or if you're trying to get a company's customers to start using some new functionality or application. Advisory boards, user groups, even consulting services that are focused on getting the most or rolling out a project that the company has just completed. And then references and customer content, which is what we're going to talk about here. So we have Kyle Sabra from Blue Fusion with us. Blue Fusion is a partner agency for Aventi. Somebody's done some great work for us. He's going to be our moderator. He's going to ask Michaela and I a couple different questions as we go through this. We're going to focus on references, as I said, but also from both the internal and external perspective. Michaela's going to get into that a little bit more, but I think references can be, and reference activities can be done inside a company to promote, especially bigger companies, and there's a big deal with that. It really impacts a lot of activities. And then there's obviously external activities that relate to sales and marketing. And then finally, we're going to hit on a couple different elements. So things like timing, when the best time is to talk to customers about references and how you do it, motivation and value, what's in it for them, innovative content. This is where we'll touch on a couple of different examples of some neat things that we've seen going on by some of either companies in the market or our customers, and also the message, what makes a really strong customer story, and how do you make it most effective. Okay, so Kyle, I'm going to turn it over to you. And we've given you a list of questions to sort of go back and forth with, and I'll let you take it from there.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So let's start off with a little bit about internal customer success. So Michaela, can you explain the difference between internal customer success and external customer success, and why it's important to invest in promoting customers internally as well as externally?
Sure. I mean, in a number of the clients that we work with, they're large enterprises, so you get diverse sales forces and sales teams that have different focuses. So internal customer success is really promoting wins and migrations and adoptions internally in your company to help fuel additional sales, right? So when we think of customer references, we typically think of, logos on a website or customer stories and videos that we post on websites, but it's actually just as important to do that championing internally to try to build momentum for a specific product line, a specific sales action. Maybe it's a focus for that quarter, for that half, as well as, like, for example, we're seeing in one of our clients really championing the success stories of people who are using the products of that company to respond to COVID, right? So as they stand up stories, telling those stories internally so that we can retell those stories in sales situations and consulting situations to get customers confident that they can do the same. So internal stories are really focused on your internal teams, whether they're sales or customer success or consulting or product or marketing, any internal enterprise team, where external are really focused on usually earlier funnel, you're trying to show people like them who have used the product, right? Like a prospect. So they're a little bit different focus, but I think they're critically important, especially as you get larger companies. Great.
Okay, perfect. So second question would be, so really, what is the best time to develop internal customer success stories? And then what are some of the best practices on how to go about it?
It's always a good time for customer success. No, seriously. I mean, I think, the reality is I find with the stories that we've been working on really the last couple of years has been really about the wins. So when you have a successful sale, telling the story of that sale, especially when it's a competitive sale. So if you have one or two main competitors, we have a compete campaign that literally is, we're doing internal success stories to talk about our wins against that competitor, right? So that we educate the sales force and anyone involved in a sale, whether they're pre-sales, consulting, or SEs or whatever, to help arm them with what it was in that deal that helped win the deal. So it can be at the deal, so at win or loss, for example. It's just as important to tell loss stories, but not as much fun. And then I think, of course, after they're live, right? After you have good adoption or a good story with your solution. So that can be something, for example, if they had to migrate from perpetual to a named user license model, right? That's a big kind of migration. Or if they moved to a new version or part of your suite. So if they expanded product line. So really it can be anything that you want to emphasize that motion with prospects or current customers or increase sales according to those motions. So I think that answered the question. The best practices are really, really interesting in the sense that I think the number one thing is ask. I think we all sometimes wait for official reference teams to kind of have their wheels in motion, but ultimately the internal stories are something that can be done anytime with the help of just internal teams. You don't even necessarily need to involve the customer. And why is that important in an enterprise? Because there's so many legal catches with references and people get, caught up in that process of getting it approved, where you can tell a win story without necessarily making it public or necessarily using the logo and still have a really great story. So I would say the best times, to summarize, the best times are at win or at major motion, whether it's an upgrade or expansion or adoption. And the best ways to go about it are really to start asking and then really have kind of a templated process that everybody can use, right? And it should be simple. Like a win story is one slide. It doesn't need to be a detailed story. The use and adoption stories tend to be a little bit longer, but have something that's very approachable so that people feel confident that they can get it done. Great. Okay. And then, so what kind of content do you need to create these internal stories? And ultimately, how much is the customer involved? Yeah, it's, when you're talking about internal stories, at least what I've been working on has been really focused on getting them done. And sometimes that involves the customer and sometimes it doesn't. The reality is that the teams in an enterprise that work closely with the customer know a huge amount about the customer situation. So I find working with those teams an accelerator. And then, if that team has a friendly relationship, which they often do with the customer, you can then ask to get the customer involved as well. So it really depends in terms of how much is the customer involved, and that depends on your relationship with the customer or your team's relationship with the customer. So let's talk a little bit about what kinds of content. So ultimately, working with your teams, I think I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but you really want to tell a story. So if I'm trying to tell a win story against a competitor or a major motion story like an upgrade, I really need to think about, okay, what did they do before? What led them to the win or the switch? And then what was the result? But if you just think in those basic terms, you get a pretty good story. And it lends itself to a really good structure because that's what people want to know. They want to know what happened before, what was the change, and what was the result. And the result hopefully is metric, something measurable that you can say that it sped sales or it increased cycle time or whatever it is that you can get that maybe is a customer measurement. But really focusing on trying to tell that story in any of those is really an important thing. I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything to add to that, but that's, I think, how I would start really kind of with a framework.
No, I think that's great. I think those are really good points.
Perfect. Okay, so Jeff, let's go on to you. So how would you talk to a customer about promoting their success? And also, how do you answer the "what's in it for me" question?
Yeah, so this is a good, I like this question. This is a good follow-up to what Michaela was just talking about. So anybody who has been involved with references or customer success on any side of it, and is always a little nervous about going to the customer and asking them if they're ready to be a reference. So we've had a lot of experience with this, and I've sort of over time come to think about it a little bit differently. I've found that this actually is something you can get concerned about and sort of overthink, but it turns out to almost be less of an issue when the customer is happy and excited about talking about what they're doing. So if they're ready to be a reference and they have a really interesting story, it almost becomes a non-issue. It's as if I've been in experiences where they're almost waiting for somebody to come ask them to talk about what they've been doing. To use an analogy for any barbecue fans out there and barbecuing steaks, it's very hard, or I used to think it was very hard to figure out when to turn the steak, but then somebody finally told me, well, it'll just release and it's easy to turn, and that's when you turn it. And so this is sort of similar in that way, is if the most helpful reference customers out there are the ones that want to be a reference and are very excited about their success and the solution that you've provided to them, because it's helped them solve a huge problem. And it has given them a lot of value to talk about. So they're not really looking for something in return. Now, the flip side of that, I think, is if you immediately run into questions like, what am I going to get for it? What are you going to do for me? Why would I do this? What's your reference program about? That's a little bit of a red flag for me when I run into those situations, is that maybe that customer is not quite ready, or there's something else going on. They're not really happy with the results, or they're having some other complexity. So maybe you need to understand, maybe back off a little bit and wait until something clears itself.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jeff. It's almost like that. In that case, that might not be the best story.
Yeah, and that's, instead of forcing it.
Yeah.
That's a good chance to say, okay, let me step back. And if you have enough prospects, sort of testing the water and seeing what sort of response you get, that can really make this a lot easier. And then the conversation, I think it's perfectly fine, and you should expect people to ask, tell me about your reference program. What do I get in return? But that should almost be, the last factor, sort of frosting on the cake. That should not be the primary reason why they're interested in being a reference. And if it is, you should push back, or I don't mean push back, step back a little bit and sort of see what's going on. The other side of that is, so on the other hand, or thinking about, if I was asked to say what is the value of a customer being a reference to a vendor or a service provider, I think there's all sorts of reasons. And these are just a few, but if you start to think about it, it can really be a benefit, not just for the company that's asking you to be a reference, but for your customer. For example, I think the biggest one, especially if it's a bigger company, is that as a customer reference, you have your service provider or your vendor spending their own marketing dollars to promote your story. And it can get very personal to promote you as an innovator or somebody that's really leading in their segment. So there's a lot of direct value, especially if the company has a good, well thought through reference program where they're not overly focused on them, but they're really out there talking about your success and your solution. That is real value, real dollars, and probably something a lot of times the companies struggle to have their own money to spend on. So right there on its own is tremendous value. I think it builds better relationships between vendors and service providers and customers. This increases trust, and sometimes, probably a lot of times, gives a customer more access to the vendor solution providers management. This can be important in big companies where it's hard to get the attention of people and hard to get information about what's coming next. It can also be equally important with smaller companies that you're working with, in that if you're a customer reference for a smaller software provider, you all of a sudden get sort of an outsized role, especially if you're an active reference, in being involved in some of their discussions about product direction, being asked to test some new features, stuff like that, that may not come to you if you don't have that type of relationship. It also builds goodwill, which absolutely comes into play. It might be subtly, but if there's goodwill between a customer and a vendor, that is in most cases for the next deal going to turn into a deal that both parties are more happy with. And then finally, there is, I think, customers who become active references do get invitations to events, activities, other things that would cost them money or that might not be available to them if they didn't have that relationship. So as I said, things like, especially that last bullet, that's more interesting if it's a big software company or hardware company or technology company or whatever kind of company that has major global events that are expensive and that are places where you want to be. But again, even for smaller companies, being a reference gives you access to some pretty neat experiences that you wouldn't get otherwise. I don't know, Michaela, anything else you would add to that, or that you've?
No, I think that's right. And I think thinking of it as a relationship is really important, because it is going to be a long-term relationship typically in an enterprise situation. So anything you do with that reference will build itself up. And you've seen good reference stories get even better over time and then end up at the main stage at a customer event or a customer virtual event. So I do think thinking about that in terms of ensuring that they tell their story and really that internal champion thing. I mean, there are a lot of really amazing stories out there. And so getting that person to talk about what they're excited about and really then linking onto that is really key, I think, for sure.
Good.
Great. Okay. So Michaela, while we're talking to you, what are some innovative ways you've seen companies promote their customers internally?
I mean, I think there's a lot of good ways. I think a couple that I've seen that I really like is depending on what you're using for your field enablement internally in your company, getting those stories posted there and tagged correctly, right? So that I can go up there and search on a company, but more specifically on an industry or on a kind of event, right? Again, like an upgrade or a launch or something like that, so that I can start to see stories that are related to that. Industry is very, very helpful. So I would say posting internally in ways that are consumable, right? So that really depends company to company what that means. And then the other thing is actually continuing to repeat it in front of customer-facing teams. So whether that's a sales force or a consulting team or a SE type team, the reality is getting in front of them regularly with kind of a drumbeat, right? So it isn't enough to do it once and say, great, now you know where they're all posted, go, just assuming that they'll always find them. It really has to be every quarter or half when they're having their meetings, getting in there and getting 5 minutes to show the latest ones that you have and highlight a couple of them, as well as working with those salespeople that you are telling the story of their customer, because they like to show people too. So really it's almost ensuring you get to the sales team through a bunch of different angles and the other teams as well, because it's not just sales who's interacting with the customers, right? If professional services or any of the consultants or customer success managers can bring in stories of related customers in their industry, that's going to be something that our customers or prospects really want to read.
The one thing I'd add is that I think we've seen a number of cases where having a really strong relationship between sales and marketing is really helpful, because different companies have different sales cultures, and really understanding the sort of personality of a sales organization in terms of how they like to talk about references and customer success with prospects can really inform what a marketing organization does to make those that type of content or that making their references available so that it's a nice fit. I think that comes into play a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, great. So let's switch gears here a little bit and move on to external customer success. Jeff, what are some innovative customer success programs or campaigns that you've seen, and what do you think really made them successful?
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to probably be a little repetitive in some ways, because it's going to emphasize some of the things I've said earlier. But the examples that I have worked with or seen, I'm going to bring up some specifics in a minute, are ones that put a lot of control and creativity in the hands of the customer. So it doesn't sound that complicated, but it's more, there's a couple really good examples here of flipping things on its side, really finding the customers that are excited to tell their story, and then let them really have a role in designing or creating how they tell that story. So letting them have input into the format, the structure, the graphics, branding, not being too heavy-handed about the branding that goes into reference content, even making it very customer brand focused if you can. It also needs to be fun and personal for the person that you're asking to be a reference. It needs to be not just about the company and they're sort of the messenger, but it needs to be about them and what they've done. And one of the examples, I think you can even take that further, it needs to be about the project team. So we're a whole group within a company. That really broadens the impact to show that, hey, this group of people worked with your products or solutions and made this huge step function change over this amount of time, and this is what it's meant for them. You get some different perspectives. So I think making it really personal brings out a real emotional appeal. The focus, I think, also needs to be on the outcomes. This is, I think, very hard for tech companies, frankly, who are very focused on their product and the really neat technology they're using. But for the people, and there will always be a need for technical customer references. But I think in most cases, it's fair to say the people you really want to reach and the way to have a customer story, especially externally, have an impact is to focus on the business outcomes and whatever it is that is making that customer or that individual proud of the solution, excited, even if it means not mentioning your specific product name. That it can be hard, but I think sometimes you'll find you get a much more powerful story coming out of the content.
Yeah, Jeff, it's funny on that point. I mean, I think a lot of times you really have to probe on that because I think people almost panic when you ask for metrics, like they are like, oh no, like the metric question. But if you start probing around, like what's changed in their organization or what good stories do they have about a person who had a big, who went through a change after something happened, like if you start asking those kinds of questions, you actually get some really cool stuff. So I definitely encourage focusing on that and really probing all around the kind of benefits you expect to really get those stories.
I think that's true. We're going to talk about that in our last question, but metrics are great if you have them to use them. But I don't think there is absolutely a way to have a really powerful reference or customer story without having to say we saved 10% or we saved 50% or whatever here. I think if you can get that emotional appeal or get somebody to talk about, as you said, Michaela, what's really changed in their own words, that can be almost equally and sometimes more powerful than just a number. So quickly, 3 examples that I wanted to call out, and we don't have link. We can share links if you want, but it's pretty easy to find. These are big companies. And to that point, I did pick 3 larger companies just so everybody would know who I'm talking about. There are absolutely examples from smaller companies, a number of clients that we've worked with who are doing some really interesting things, equally interesting as these examples that I'm going to call out around customer success and customer references. The first one I want to talk about just briefly is the SAP Innovation Awards. This is something that we as Aventi have been lucky to be part of almost since its beginning, which was 7 or 8 years ago now. It started as this way where SAP was trying to really highlight some innovative customer stories around SAP HANA when that was first coming out. They wanted to show that customers that were using that were really doing some fascinating things. What they did is they came out with a program, as I like to describe it, they really flipped references on their head. Instead of going out and asking customers to come in and do content, what they did is they launched a program and made it a contest and asked customers to sort of compete with each other and tell their own story, how they wanted to tell it, and on their own to be able to show, well, we had the most innovative example of using SAP HANA or technology in general to really transform our business. And that just kept building on itself. It started out, as I said, in that one area, and over the years expanded to the whole company, and now it's a really core part of, I would say, almost everything they do in marketing and to some degree sales has some little flavor from the Innovation Awards now that they're using. So it's fascinating the way that's really integrated. It's hugely popular with both customers internally at SAP and partners. I think it's with some of the features, very personal. So the focus is really put, as I've been saying, on the individual, on the company, sure, but also the individual, the project team, and the people that were involved, so that they really got that the value of the SAP marketing engine behind them. And it's also now a year-round program, and it's integrated into all their other stuff. So that, on an individual program basis, is probably one of the best examples out there. Salesforce has something called the Trailblazer Spotlight, which I've been really impressed with. If you, you know, there's so much you can do with media and video and graphics now, and the Trailblazer Spotlight and the next example I'm going to talk about are great examples of that. Lots, you know, really visual appealing, fun to look at, big videos. What I thought the Trailblazer Spotlight does, it sort of takes a broader look at a specific customer. It's very personal, gives you multiple perspectives. So this is where you're not just getting one person with a quote, but you're getting multiple perspectives of different people involved in a project come and give their perspective. And I think there's not a lot of examples of that happening, but that is something that's emerging, is to get that, especially for broader projects. And then finally, another company you've heard of, Apple, and their enterprise side, I think they have this Apple at Work layout, which is just one of the better displays of customer reference stories that I've seen out there. The common thing right now is sort of the tile framework that is easy to do. They've sort of put that on steroids and expanded it out. So lots of, much bigger space for some of their stories. They're using terms like a film about the story versus just a video. It's very graphical. They're combining video and stills and also other graphics to tell the story. Lots of detail, but it's not too level. It's not too low level. It stays up there, but sort of talks about the overall envision. So I don't know, Michaela, if you have any others that you can call out, but to me, those are three of the ones that I've seen really stand out recently.
Yeah, no, and I really always admire the Innovation Awards for the way that they motivate people to want to tell their story, because you're commending the innovation, right? Which everyone wants to be innovative. That's just it's an amazing program. So it's a really neat one.
Great. Okay. So Michaela, let's go back to the topic of timing customer success discussions with customers for external customer success programs. Do you do it at the same time as you bring up the internal, or different? And how is the message different?
I mean, I do think it's similar timing. I think it depends, right? I mean, in terms of like the Innovation Awards, I know that you're going to time it according to your program. But I think ultimately, when you're talking about external references, they take longer to nurture. So I think you're going to want to have something that's as low effort on their part as possible to start, right? And that may develop into something over time, but start with something that is low effort and is after some sort of milestone, whether it's a win, a sale, a deployment, adoption, some sort of environmental or event like we've had with COVID is a really good way to follow that up and talk about, how they addressed it with technology and that kind of thing. So you'll hear these stories from a bunch of internal teams, and it's really just trying to, I find when I hear the story, I immediately start asking the questions, well, who knows the customer the best? Who could I talk to, right? And making sure that you're tracking that and following up on it. So I think, the difference is once you start talking about promoting externally, there just needs to be a little bit more legal review. And depending on the company, it's a lot of legal review, and some companies it's not as much, but you have to account for that in timing. So I think your lead times just increase, and you need to plan for that to ensure that if you have something you're aiming at, whether it's an event or a launch or something like that, you need to make sure that you actually have that time backed up on the backside to get through the reference story.
Great. Okay. So, finally, let's talk a little bit more about what makes a good customer success story. Michaela, can you speak at all to that?
Yeah, I think I talked about it a little bit already in terms of, start with what was the before, what changed, and what were the results. That's really the framework. But I think in that framework, it's really important to tie to personal goals, like Jeff said, like what was their role in it, and when they talk about challenges, like get beyond the generic enterprise challenges, right? I mean, people will say, well, you know, we had an organizational challenge. Well, what does that mean? Like keep asking why until you get a really good story. And that's my kind of number one rule to getting to the meat of any situation is keep asking why, because people will start at a very high level. And if you keep asking why, you're going to get to the story that is just hilarious or, you know, also very compelling, right? I mean, so that's the stuff that makes good references. So I would say start with the framework and then dive down as much as possible so that you really understand the situation that they're acting in. And then, you know, we talked about personal, but I think all of us are here doing jobs and we want to make a difference. So I think working with stakeholders to ensure that their work is mentioned, whether it's their project team, their department, it could even be their organization within a larger organization, but really trying to help promote their role and how that they helped. I think Jeff's seen that too on a lot of the award contests, is that's just something that's very motivating for people if they can highlight things that they had been involved in.
Yeah,
great. Yeah, Jeff, did you have anything to say on that?
No, I think that's a great point. It really needs to be about what gets somebody excited. We talked about focus on outcomes, focus on the story.
Yeah.
We want to demystify the technology. There's this ultimate desire to talk about, you know, basically, I've seen companies want to sort of almost verbatim repeat their messaging in a customer story, which is very tempting to do. It's not very effective. So you really want to get a customer to talk about it at the high level. Maybe they mention your product, hopefully they do, but really they're talking about a huge benefit and a fun, exciting story or a funny story that had a big impact, and you're connected to that as the service provider that helped them. That's the biggest, you know, common thread that you see about really powerful success stories. There's so much you can do with audio and video and graphics and animations and fun things right now that you can make it very visually pleasing. But you also have to have a very short and clear message. Keep it high level. It's too much text, I don't think it'll get read. So it needs to be just sort of the key points that you want somebody to take out of it. I often, the test I use is at a social gathering, a cocktail party or a dinner where you're explaining to somebody who's in a totally different industry what's happening. How would you, so call it an elevator pitch, whatever you want to do, how would you talk about that? That needs, you know, the elements of that makes it a good story, that keeps the person you're talking to interested and engaged. Those are some of the features I think that you can directly map to effective customer stories. I think that's it. Anything that we missed, Michaela, or should we wrap it up?
Well, you know, the only thing that made me think of, which I think is really effective, is just also taking a step back as the person that's writing the story or involved in helping the story take shape and tying it to their organizational goals, right? I mean, it's just an extra bit of research that doesn't take all that long to really understand at the executive level in their company, what are they driving towards? Because digital transformation is certainly one of the things, right? And if they have specific initiatives that you can fold that story in under and make it tie to the things that they're getting measured on, right? Like show that cascade of objectives all the way from the top to the individual project. That just makes, I mean, it's usually true, and it makes for a great story. So I would definitely encourage that.
Good. Okay, I think we're going to stop here. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Michaela. And thank you for everybody who's taken the time to watch this. This is obviously just touching on a few areas of customer success and even just a few elements of references. We'd love to hear any comments or any reactions you've had to anything that we've talked about here, or other examples that you've been aware of that you think we didn't mention, or that are another idea or innovation around customer success. So thank you very much. Everyone's be safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, and just before we leave, the best way to contact you guys would be at aventigroup.com?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, either Jeff at aventigroup.com or Michaela at aventigroup.com. Just by email is the best way to follow up.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cal.